Let's look at a definition of productivity. Productivity is a combination of knowledge, skills, attitude, which I'm going to call mindset throughout this session this morning. And there's also three measures that when we were doing research in iOpener that we came up, three outcome measures. And we chose focus on task to be one key measure of productivity. Focus on task actually comes from an economist and a Nobel Prize winner, Edmund Phelps. And we feel that this is something that is critical in terms of measuring productivity, together with a couple of other outcome measures, sick leave and intention. Because as we started to look at what these outcome measures were, we then thought, well, what is it that actually causes performance improvement? How can we increase focus on task? How can we reduce sick leave? And how can we reduce the intention to leave an organisation? And we realised that one of the key things around productivity is, in fact, mindset. And as we started to explore mindset, we then thought, right, what is the literature telling us? And what was fascinating was that one of the key things that came up was happiness. Happiness is a key indicator, or key driver, I should say, of increased performance. And we looked around, we found that actually happiness is something that is becoming an issue globally. But we were particularly interested in what is it that actually increases performance at work. And we developed, through lots of focus groups, through a number of different surveys, we asked people, what was it that actually helped change their mindset, and what was it that helped improve their performance at work? And we came up with a whole bunch of different items, and I'm not going to be talking to you about the specifics of the research, although if you're interested in that, I can certainly cover that in question time. So it's about a mindset which is allowing people to maximize their performance and to achieve their potential. Now here's what's interesting. You actually need to do this by being mindful. So there's a key element here that if people are going to increase their performance, they need to increase their awareness. But happiness is not just about the highs. Clear message coming through right now is that happiness is also contingent on stretching your horizons. So in other words, if people don't have tough experiences, if people don't have some challenge in life, they don't feel they're achieving their potential. So it is about being mindful of the highs and the lows. And people can have this mindset and be productive. It's also about being alone and also when working with other people. Now, one of the other things that's really important as we start to see people who are happy is that the ones who are resilient when times are tough are the ones who create a bank. You know, that they in a sense build up the highs and they use the resources that they have when they're high to deal with those times when things are tough. Now you may be thinking to yourself, what's this happiness and how does it relate to job satisfaction? What's the connection between job satisfaction and engagement and happiness at work? First off, job satisfaction is very much about comfort. It's about people feeling satisfied with their job, but it doesn't incorporate interest. Okay? So you can be kind of satisfied with your job, but you're not motivated particularly. You're not that interested in your job. You just have a sense of comfort in the job that you're working in. Engagement is something that's slightly different. Engagement is very much something that is top-down driven, and engagement, as we started to explore what people meant by it, is very much around your commitment to your job, your commitment to the organisation, I should say. So people who are engaged in the workplace have a commitment and maybe are aligned to what the workplace stands for, but they're not necessarily happy. What we found is that people who are the happiest employees are people who and this is pre-recession data. I'm going to show you pre- and post-recession. Fascinating how there's been a shift. Pre-recession, the most happy people were spending 77% of their time focused on task. Okay. Least happy, 51%. So you're talking here between about 2.5 days to, just on 4. It's 1.25 days difference in a week between the most and the least happy. Well, that's quite significant. But let's look for a moment at post-recession. A massive difference. 2 days a week for the least happy. 4 days a week for the most happy. Now what we're saying is that even the most happy people, there is still some downtime. You know, there's coffee, there's kind of chats, there's occasional look at Facebook, there's doing your personal emails, whatever it is. There's still stuff that kind of distracts people. It's very hard to get people 100% focused on task here. But there is a massive difference between the two groups here. Now let's look at sick leave for a moment. Pre-recession, the most happy people, 2 days a year. Now I should say on sick leave, most of our data is private sector, not public sector. So if you actually isolated the public sector out, the figures may work. Although it means that the most happy people are staying longer, which is great news because guess what, they're more productive. The challenge is that actually the least happy people are proportionally staying a lot longer. Because guess what, it's tougher out there to get another job. The other point I just wanted to make too is that if you actually look at the various different groups from least to most happy, there is a very strong just correlation. The less happy you are, the less focused on task you are, the lower the sick leave, the lower intention to quit if you're very happy. But from most to least, there's a very strong correlation between all of the scores here. Okay, so what? I've given you some comparative data here. If you take an organisation with 1,000 employees and you move them up 1 standard deviation, okay? Now if you think of a normal bell curve, you're familiar with a normal bell curve where the majority of the population are in the middle. Well, our happiness scores follow very much the normal bell curve. If you leave the bottom ones, because basically they're the no-hopers, the ones at the very bottom, ideally you'd like to manage them out. If you can't, what we suggest is you ignore them. The most happy ones, actually you don't need to worry about because they're getting on with the job and being very productive. But the ones in the middle, if you were to just move them up 1 standard deviation, this is what the impact would be for 1,000 employees. You get the equivalent of 74 additional full-time employees if you could move people's happiness score up because of that relationship to the outcome measures that I've just talked you through. Now, this would be equivalent to $280, $1,000 rather, less in terms of sick leave. And here's what's interesting. If you move people up 2 standard deviations in terms of their scores, you get an exponential effect. So it's the equivalent of 180 employees and $720,000. So it's a massive increase in terms of the impact on productivity in the workforce if you can actually move people up. We come up with a kind of molecular structure where there are 5 key factors, the 5 C's. And there are some elements that actually comprise each of those 5 factors. So at the top we've got contribution. Contribution, what you do, your effort, and your perception of the effort that you put in. Now this is the number 1. It's the most important thing to contribute to productivity. Then we've got conviction, which is all about your motivation in the moment, your short-term motivation. Culture, your feeling of fit between you and the organisation. Commitment, now that's your long-term engagement, that sense of purpose and doing something worthwhile. And then confidence, what it says on the tin, It's your belief in yourself and your organisation. Those are the core 5 factors. And then at the kind of the nub, the kernel of this is all about achieving your potential. And this is the stretch piece that I was talking about before. If people don't have that sense of stretch, then people don't really have that innate sense of happiness that drives their productivity. Now around the edge, you've got pride, trust and recognition. What these we found are not actual drivers of happiness, but they need to be in place in order for people to improve their productivity. Contribution. Some of the elements around contribution come from within the person. Some of the elements around contribution come from outside. And contribution became the most important because there were so many kind of elements that underpin what we mean by contribution in people's perception. The most important of all in contribution was achieving your goals, followed by having clear objectives. Now this may seem blindingly obvious to all of you, achieving your goals and having clear objectives. But what we found fascinating is that actually people don't, one of the biggest problems that people say is that I'm not clear about what my goals are. Or I may be clear about what my goals are, but I actually don't understand how they contribute to the big picture. And because I don't understand how they contribute to the big picture, guess what? I don't really feel I'm doing something worthwhile, and I don't see how it links to the broader purpose. So you start to see some links. Because I don't see that, guess what? I start to lose engagement here, and then that impacts my short-term motivation, possibly even my confidence. Some of the other issues around goals is that people feel, well, I've been set a whole bunch of goals, but actually I don't believe they're achievable. I haven't got the resources to deliver on them. They're rubbish, really. Or I worked in organisations where they set goals at the beginning of the year, and the goal-setting process is supposed to start at the beginning of the year, but actually they don't set the goals until Q2. So people spend the whole first quarter wondering what they're supposed to be doing for that year and just doing business as usual. It's just extraordinary when you think about it, because it seems so blindingly obvious, but there is still some issues. I think, and this is a message for managers here, is that managers sometimes think they've communicated the goals, but actually guess what? The individuals haven't really engaged, don't understand, for whatever reason don't necessarily challenge in order to get that clarification. So really part of, I guess, our role as managers really is helping make sure people do understand their goals, how they connect to the bigger picture, and really start to elicit feedback on the extent to which people have engaged with them. Let's look at culture. One of the key issues that we found around this sense of fit is that people feel a lack of control in terms of how they manage their environment, their culture. Now what's interesting here is that there's sometimes a difference between perception and reality. And a lot of the time, and I know maybe you find this, that you may be working with people, you may feel it yourself, or it may be in your team, where actually you feel I don't have any control in this situation. And it's easy then to fall victim and actually think, well, there's nothing I can do, and you get frustrated and one can get into a negative spiral. Actually, people often have more control over their own environment than they realise. And if you don't have absolute control, what do you have influence over? Because once you start to think about what do I have control, what do I have influence over, you can then actually start to think about, well, what action can I take, rather than remaining fixed or feeling trapped in the situation.